Regular Monster Hunter has had an accessibility problem for quite some time, but it's also a lot like riding a bicycle. You never really forget how to play once you've learned it once, and many of the game's fans learned how so long ago they probably don't realize how overwhelming Monster Hunter is for brand new players. In some ways, Monster Hunter Stories 2 is like a reverse Monster Hunter. It onboards new players very well, it's very easy to jump into, but it starts to get overwhelming the longer you play. Unlike the action combat focused mainline Monster Hunter series, Stories 2 is a turn-based RPG with a strong story focus. It might even be a scheme by Capcom to even out all of the virtual monster killing they're responsible for, because Stories 2 is not just any kind of turn-based RPG, it's a monster collector. Although the way you collect these monsters is by stealing eggs from monster nests, which does occasionally involve killing the parents, so Anyway, this game is freaking long, like way longer than I thought it would be. The story is interesting enough, but the most impressive thing about this aspect of the game is how the story is delivered. The cutscene animation and direction is insane. For a game with relatively reserved graphics, it's quite incredible they managed to get so much life and so much fun out of these characters and the monsters and everything else in the cutscenes. In about 80% of them, I kind of just sat back in awe of what I was seeing.
The village is in danger! Frostbang! Come on!
No time to lose, buddy! We've got to hurry after them!
I won't let this happen!
The other impressive thing is how much this still feels like a Monster Hunter game when it's so fundamentally different from regular Monster Hunter. This is both a blessing and a curse though, because I feel this would have been a better game overall had it purely focused on the single player story-driven experience. The co-op multiplayer part of Stories 2 is just not good. Co-op hunts are not only a staple of the mainline Monster Hunter series, most fans would probably say that they are the best part. Multiplayer forms much of the end game, and they try to do something similar with Stories 2, but it feels tacked on and unnecessary. Even with the best online infrastructure in the world, which Nintendo definitely do not have, I don't think they'd be able to make this anywhere near as seamless or as fun as mainline Monster Hunter. Co-op turn-based battles are clunky at best, and this is far from the best implementation of such a feature. Worse though is the knock-on effect it has to other parts of the game. The insistence on having multiplayer be a thing can make parts of the story and the game itself feel a little drawn out. There are times where you'll make it to a new village and the story kind of settles into a holding pattern for a little too long. What really annoyed me though was the way monsters are so slowly drip-fed to you, and this is almost certainly the result of them trying to keep the game balanced with multiplayer in mind. Most of the exploration in this game comes from diving into monster dens to snatch up rare eggs, but scattered all throughout the world are special dungeons called Everdens. Everdens are like the randomly generated monster dens, but they're in fixed locations and are much larger. This is because each one has a number of chests that contain bottle caps, and you'll need bottle caps to do things like upgrade your stables and buy new cosmetic items. The catch is that most of these chests can only be reached by using monsters with certain field abilities. Some monsters can jump over large gaps, some can climb up ivy vines, some can swim, etc. What this effectively means though is that any monster that doesn't have one of these special field abilities is basically unusable unless you don't mind having to come back later and redo these Everdens to get all the bottle caps. Combined with how slowly new interesting monsters seem to get introduced to you, it can really impact the enjoyment of the monster collecting, which is one of the main sources of fun. I had the first crappy monster the story gives you to begin the game in my party for what felt like 15 or 20 hours just because it was the only damn monster that had jump. You'd find rare new eggs, hatch awesome looking new monsters, check their abilities only to find they didn't have any of the crucial field abilities, then sadly lock them away in the stables. By the time you make it to the end game or close to the end of the story and it's time to start customizing your monsters by sacrificing other ones, it's going to start to get a little overwhelming. Each monster has a little 3x3 grid with orbs that represent stat boosts, skills, and combat abilities. Matching elements and skill types bingo style grants additional stat bonuses. You can sacrifice a monster to give one of its orbs to another, and when you have a full stable, less than optimal menus and sorting options, and a quadrillion different combinations of skills and stats and abilities, you could find yourself sitting there for hours whittling down your monsters to a solid party and still not actually end up with what you want. But that bit I don't really see as a problem. Making builds using mechanics like these is enjoyable, it's just that by the time you actually feel that it's worth it to start investing serious time doing it, it's going to be a lot to take in. Overall, these issues might sound more serious than they actually are. In the context of the game as a whole and how addictive it is, they're more periodic annoyances than they are serious flaws. I just get the distinct feeling that if they didn't bother with the multiplayer aspect and instead just focused on making a really great single-player RPG, the result would be a more well-rounded game that's even more enjoyable than it already is. As it stands, it took me just over 60 hours to finish off the single player story, but who knows how much of that was spent customizing monsters. Your mileage may vary here, but it is a very substantial story. The game itself just carries on after that. There is more single player stuff you can take on, but Capcom are obviously hoping that you'll find enjoyment in the co-op multiplayer missions, and maybe you will. There are free content updates on the way, and unlike Monster Hunter Rise, which won't come to PC until next year, Monster Hunter Stories 2 launched on both the Switch and PC at the same time. I played the demo on PC, but was provided a review code by Nintendo here in Australia for the Switch version. Initially, I was worried about the performance on Switch because the first couple of cutscenes definitely drop frames, but after that, there are very few instances where it got anywhere near that bad. It's mostly fairly solid, albeit 30 FPS for obvious reasons. So pick up the PC version if you want higher frame rates and moderately prettier graphics, but I have to admit that this type of game does feel at home on a console that can be played in portable mode. If you are a handheld gamer, the Switch version is also great. Regardless of which platform you pick though, you should definitely give Monster Hunter Stories 2 a go. It's really fun and really addictive. It could scratch that Pokemon itch at least for a little while. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all soon.